attending. Today we have Boris Quednow from Zurich. Boris started off doing his research into recreational stimulant use, very similar to what I do, but branched out from MDMA and has been investigating the longitudinal long-term effects of cocaine use and how they differ with continuing use or abstinence or increasing and decreasing use. So I'm going to hand it over to you now, Boris, if you'd like to take it away.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to present my data today in your nice department. And yeah, I would like to talk about our Zurich cocaine cognition study that we did in the last 5 years, and where we try to find out how or which cognitive deficits of cocaine users may be drug-induced, and if there are also some predispositions for drug use that might predict cocaine use or escalating cocaine use. First of all, I think most of you know this, a little bit about the history of cocaine. Cocaine itself is a psychoactive alkaloid of the coca plant, and the coca plant is cultivated since about 5,000 years in the northern Andes. And there it is still used as a tonic, as a natural stimulant up to date. In the mid of the 18th century, the coca plant arrives in Europe, and about 100 years later, a German chemist called Albert Niemann firstly isolates cocaine from the plant. And then it was fastly noticed that cocaine has a strong anesthetic or local anesthetic effect, and was used as a local anesthetic, but also as a treatment for the rising problem of morphine addiction at that time. That was not such a good idea, turned out only some years later. Cocaine, as most of you will also know, is a strong reuptake inhibitor at the monoamine transporters. It blockades the dopamine, serotonin, and the noradrenaline transporter, causing a transient increase of these neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft. And with this, we have an intense stimulation of postsynaptic monoamine receptors, and also a stimulation of the frontal limbic reward system, probably mainly induced by the dopamine release in the ventral tegmental area, in the nucleus accumbens, and also in the prefrontal cortex. And with that, we have these acute subjective effects like increased euphoria, drive of energy, enhanced vigilance and thoughts, and also the elevated self-confidence, which might be one of the main reasons why people use cocaine. The problem is that cocaine has, due to these strong rewarding properties, has relatively strong addictive potential. You know, the most addictive compound that we know is still nicotine, followed by heroin, and then about 15 to 20% of people starting regular use of cocaine will likely develop addiction disorder sometimes in their life. And if the addictive potential and the physical harm is taken into account, then at least that not is this opinion. Cocaine is the second most dangerous drug directly after heroin. At the moment, cocaine is the second most prevalent used drug worldwide, in Europe, and also, I think, also in Britain, directly after cannabis. And we saw a strong elevation or strong increase of cocaine use across the 90s and the early 2000 years, and they dropped in parallel with the financial crisis, dropped a little bit and are now getting down. At the moment, we think that there are about 3.3 million users estimate about the last year prevalence, and these numbers are higher in younger people. We have also some data from Switzerland. There, the estimated last year prevalence is also about 1%. Unfortunately, Switzerland does not take part at the moment in these EMCDDA surveys. Therefore, this is not comparable. However, I don't know any Swiss addiction researcher who believes this number of only 1% last year prevalence, because, and you may have seen these wastewater analysis, because Zurich or other capitals of other cities of Switzerland have shown very high concentrations of cocaine in the wastewater, and you know the highest concentrations are still measured in London, followed by cities in the Netherlands, and then followed by cities in Switzerland. And according to the surveys, Switzerland would be in the maybe in the mean of the European mean, but these numbers tell a different story. What are the consequences of at least dependent cocaine use? And we know that there are a lot of physical risks. Specifically, you have a strongly elevated risk for cardiovascular incidents, but we have also a lot of psychiatric comorbidities, like elevated risk for major depression, anxiety, suicidality, drug-induced or stimulant-induced psychosis, sleep disorders, elevated tendency for violence, and also cognitive deficits. And it was not clear so far if these cognitive deficits spanning from attention to executive functions are caused by the drug or are predispositions of the use. We were specifically interested in a special form of cognition, in a more complex form of cognition, in social cognition. Why? From the clinical phenomenology, we knew that chronic cocaine users display an elevated egocentricity and also emotional blunting. There were also some studies showing that cocaine users show an increased risk for antisocial personality disorders. And the main explanation for that was that the antisocial personality disorder, or the main feature of the disorder, is a non-adherence to social norms, and that's the reason why these people use drugs, because it's a social norm not to use drugs. However, it's not clear if stimulant use itself may induce antisocial tendencies by itself. And finally, cocaine users display in several imaging studies changes in brain regions that we know that they are crucially involved in social cognition and interaction, such as the medial prefrontal cortex, the insular region, and also the orbitofrontal cortex. Thus, we asked the question, do cocaine users show changes in social cognition and in social interaction? And therefore, we built a longitudinal study where we have a cross-sectional part, or a baseline measurement, and a follow-up measurement. And we accomplished to measure more than 100 cocaine users, and the group included recreational users and also dependent users, and a similar amount of stimulant-naive healthy controls. After 12 months, we asked the participants to come in our lab again, and we were happy that we could convince a lot of cocaine users and also a lot of controls to participate again. And we tried to characterize these population very broadly, from early information processing measured with electrophysiology, classical neuropsychology, social cognitive tasks, decision-making and impulsivity tasks, also social interactive tasks. We have genetics and gene expression, and also a lot of psychometrics. And we also did, in subsamples only, and only cross-sectionally, unfortunately, also molecular imaging, specifically glutamate PET and glutamate measurement in the spectroscopy, and also some functional imaging, and I will tell you some of the functional imaging data later. These were the inclusion and exclusion criteria. We were not only interested in addicted users, because most of the users are not addicted, and we tried to figure out what happens in these recreational users as well. And these users have had to use cocaine in the last 6 months, and at least 1 gram per month. We tried to exclude polysubstance and opioid use, and we were able to collect hair samples of most of the people and to do quantitative hair testings for most of the popular drugs. And therefore we were able to exclude people with a clearly polytoxic drug use pattern, at least in the last 6 months. We excluded also psychiatric diseases, with exception of ADHD and a history of a depressive episode, because both is so highly comorbid with stimulant use that you can't exclude it without having only a very, very small group in the end. And as you see, it was a very demanding task, because we get more than 1,000 requests via email or telephone. About 800 subjects completed a telephone screening of about half an hour. We considered more than 320 people as principally eligible for our study. We were able to test 220 of them, and later we excluded 46 of the people, mainly due to their hair analysis. The problem was not only that they had drugs in the hair that they didn't report in the drug interview, but we have also 8 or 10 people who said that they were cocaine users who had nothing in the hair, nothing illegal at least. Yeah? Therefore they were excluded as well. And the final sample, the final cross-sectional sample, consists of about 200 subjects. If I'm telling you the cross-sectional data, the numbers are a little bit smaller, because we aim to match the people very well. We try to match them for age, for sex, for school education. This was not so possible, because especially dependent users have a smaller school education, but also for verbal IQ and smoking status. And as you see, our recreational users were relatively intense users, because they have used about 1 gram per week. But none of them matched the DSM-4 criteria for addiction. The dependent users used about 8 grams per week, and we tried to estimate a cumulative lifetime dose, and in recreational users this was in the mean half a kilo of cocaine, while in the dependent users this was 5.5 kilogram of cocaine in the mean. So top value was 11 kilogram of cocaine, 11 kilogram of cocaine. And we did these quantitative hair toxicology. I only show you the values for cocaine. We not only measured cocaine, but also 3 metabolites. And as you see, the drug use, amphetamine and MDMA drug use, and also the cannabis use was not different between the 3 groups, and there was only a marginal consumption of MDMA and amphetamines in these samples. This is the most boring picture because this was known before. You see the dark gray bars are representing the dependent cocaine users, showing a relatively strong and also unspecific cognitive pattern of cognitive impairment. We built 4 cognitive domain scores: attention, working memory, declarative memory, and executive functions, and also a global cognitive index for the overall cognitive performance. And as you see, the strongest deficits were observed in the working memory domain, but maybe this is also due to the fact that working memory tasks are the most reliable task foremost. But you also see that already recreational users show a certain amount of impairment. And here we have a scatter plot of the global cognitive index, and the zero dotted line, the zero line here is the mean of the control group. And you see that only one of the dependent users is above the mean of the control group. This clearly displays that there is some cognitive change in these users. And I like this picture very much because it demonstrates or illustrates the dose-response correlation very well. We made severity groups 0 to 100 gram, 100 to 200 gram, and so on, cumulative lifetime dose, and you see the number of people strongly increases, showing, in this case, subclinical deficits. That means from about half a kilo, 50% of the cocaine users, irrespective of their addiction diagnosis, show subclinical cognitive deficits. If we apply a stronger criteria of 1.5 standard deviations, then about 20% of the subjects using more than half a kilo show clinically deficits, and after 1 kilo of cocaine, 75% of the people showing subclinical and 50% showing clinically relevant cognitive deficits. I told you that we didn't exclude ADHD, and because ADHD is also one of the main features of ADHD are cognitive dysfunctions, mainly in attention and working memory. We try to find out if maybe the underlying ADHD is responsible for this result. And interestingly, also cocaine users, dependent or recreational users without an ADHD diagnosis, still show cognitive impairments. However, the combination of ADHD and cocaine use was considerably worse. And another very important finding from my perspective is that we asked the people when they started to use cocaine. And especially people who said that they started before the age of 18 showed considerable changes in cognitive function. And that means that maybe the developing brain is specifically susceptible to cognitive changes. And this is already adjusted for the age. Yeah? It's not. It's adjusted for age effects. But I said we were not only interested in basal cognitive functions, because this was very well known, was what I have shown at the moment. We were interested in more complex cognitive functions like empathy, and we used this multifaceted empathy tests in which such photorealistic stimuli are presented, and this test tried to differentiate between cognitive empathy, which is nothing more than emotion recognition from complex stimuli, and emotional empathy. And here we have some examples. This is a typical question regarding cognitive empathy. What does this person feel? And a typical question for an explicit emotional empathy task is how much do you feel with this person, and you can rate it. And the implicit version is how much are you excited watching these pictures. Unfortunately, I didn't get a picture from the Liverpool teams here, but this is an original photo from this task. And I get very excited if I see such pictures. First of all, very interestingly, cocaine users are completely able to name the right emotion in visual tasks. We also did a task with detecting the right emotion from prosody. There they have deficits, but in visual stimuli, this is also true for faces or for eye pairs, they don't have any problem. However, they are less emotional responsive to such material. They show less emotional empathy in both conditions, in the explicit and the implicit condition. And this was also correlated with a cumulative lifetime dose and also with a weekly cocaine dose used. We also asked our people how much social contacts did they have in the last months. And we asked for several spheres of life, for their family, for their friends, for university work, and so on. And interestingly, cocaine users reported less social contacts than the controls. And they also feel a little bit less emotionally supported by their environment. And interestingly, also the social network size was correlated with cocaine consumption and also with explicit emotional empathy, which which shows a well ecological validity of both. For assessing higher theory of mind, we presented such a small picture. It's in German, unfortunately. And okay, we have no sound either. I will tell you what is happening here. It's a film. We present a film of a daily life situation, a dinner with friends. Two men and two women meet for a dinner at home, and this guy came in and said, "Hey, your hair is so looking good. Do you have a new haircut?" And he likes her very much, you feel it. And she is a little bit embarrassed and said, "Oh yeah, thank you." And then we ask questions. The film stopped 45 times, and after each scene we ask questions. And the first answer is, she thinks, the question is, what does Sandra feel or think? She thinks, her hair doesn't look good. She thinks, or she is happy about the compliment, or she's angry because she feels harassed, or she is she likes it but is also a little bit embarrassed by the compliment. And all of these answers are designed by the same ideas. One answer is every time a non-mental interpretation, one is a mental interpretation but it's not sufficient, one is an exaggerated mental interpretation, and only one answer is correct. And interestingly, specifically the dependent users have more problems to understand the goals and the intentions of other people, while the occasional or recreational users don't have any impairment here. Interestingly, if we look at the type of error that the dependent users made, then they use mostly the exaggerated version. That means that they get the right direction, but they speculate too much about cognition and emotion of the others. But we were not only interested in what we called first-person neuroscience, we also tried to measure real social interaction. And therefore, we applied two economic games, or games derived from economy. A distribution game in which the player or the participant can choose a point distribution for himself and for another player. And as you see, only the first distribution is really fair because it's 50-50. Then we have distributions that are which are unfair but efficient because you maximize the profit for both players. And then we have the rest of distributions are completely unfair and also inefficient. And importantly, these points were later paid to the people in real money. After this one-shot game, we did a second one-shot game, a dictator game. Here, the participant can choose to give the player, the other player, a certain amount of points back. And we thought if someone uses here you have two motivations, maybe a pro-social or altruistic motivation and an efficiency motivation. But here, efficiency doesn't matter. Here you have only a pro-social motivation. And interestingly, in both tasks, the cocaine users are more concerned with their own monetary gains with increasing cocaine use. And we aggregated both data points and saw that both the recreational as well as the dependent users differed from the controls. These are set score data. That means that both groups were less altruistic than the control group. If we saw the sequence of the task, then you see here that also in the control group, but also in the cocaine user groups, about 1/3 of all users are fair. In both tasks, they are fair. They choose the first distribution and later they give money to the other player. However, if you see, if some of the controls used first the unfair but efficient distribution, they turned to a fair distribution in the second task. This was less the case in the cocaine using groups, specifically in the dependent users. And foremost dependent users have chosen unfair, inefficient and unfair distributions in both tasks. Thus, while most of the initially unfair controls change to a fair behavior at the second stage, when efficiency doesn't matter, most cocaine users remained unfair. Another very basal form of social interaction is social gaze contact. And we tried to measure a specific form of social gaze contact. It was a joint attention. What is joint attention? Joint attention is the shared focus of two individuals on an object, which is achieved when one of the individuals alerts the other subject by means of eye gazing, speech, or gestures. And that means both individuals get an idea about this object. And this is known that joint attention is crucial for the development of social, of verbal, and also of other cognitive skills. And in a study of our collaboration partners, joint attention also activates the reward system. Joint attention is pleasurable. this was interesting enough that we implemented this task as a behavioral task also in our study. And we did this first as a behavioral task in an interactive eye tracking paradigm. That means that you can direct this, the process of the program directly by your eyes. The first is that you should get in contact with this virtual character and get in eye contact with him, and then you have to choose one of these squares in the periphery, and the program notices if you look on these squares, and so the avatar can respond and follow your eyes and look at the square as well. After each, we have several conditions in which you direct the attention of the avatar. We have a condition where the avatar directs your attention, and where the attention of you and the avatar is directed by the machine, by the computer. After each trial, we ask...
Boris, before I forget,
yeah.
Can you go back to the image? Do you control the pupil diameter and manipulate that as a variable?
Pupil diameter, yes. Yeah. We have pupil diameter as well. I will show you. And afterwards, we asked the people how pleasurable and how arousing this trial was. And interestingly, and this was shown before, conditions in which the avatar follows your eyes are perceived as more pleasurable. And conditions in which the avatar looks somewhere else are less pleasurable for you. This was the case in controls, but surprisingly, cocaine users did not differentiate in their ratings, in their emotional ratings, between both conditions. And this was the same also in the arousal condition. Also interesting, the pupil size, which changes if you have a contrast between both. The change in pupil size was less in the cocaine users, and we interpreted this as a blunted emotional response to social eye contact.
At which point was it being measured?
Sorry?
At which point is it being measured?
Online.
I mean,
during the task.
What's the window of measurement time? So, at what point do you say that you start measuring? I was just wondering in terms of differences in fixation pattern, you're going to get differences.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know it because it was done by a PhD student, and I have to ask her. But I think we have a relatively broad window because we had problems to get peak, or we used a mean value in a certain time window, but I don't know the duration of the time window yet. Then we got back to the scanner where the task originally came from, and aimed to measure joint attention, or to measure the neural responses to joint attention. And first of all, we were able to replicate the results, and so that's not trivial in functional imaging. We were able to replicate the activation of the reward system in the control group. Yeah? That means we found the same increased activation of the medial prefrontal cortex, also in the ventral striatum, and also other parts of the basal ganglia that was shown in the paper of Leo Schilbach before. Then, or in parallel, we measured also cocaine users. And if we compare cocaine users with controls, we notice that, as we expected, cocaine users show less activation, specifically of the medial orbitofrontal cortex, a region that was already shown to be less activated during non-social reward. And excitingly, this kind of activation was correlated with the social network size. That means people who are less able to activate the medial prefrontal cortex during this joint attention task also had fewer social contacts. Yeah? That means that maybe the ability to feel or to perceive social reward has a direct functional consequence, for example, in a lower social or smaller social network. But I promised you also some longitudinal data. First of all, we looked at the hair samples of our participants after 1 year and built 3 groups. One group who strongly increased their cocaine consumption, as seen here by the increase in cocaine concentration in the hair. One group who strongly decreased the cocaine consumption, and one group who were stable users but at a relative moderate or low level. And these were the cognitive results, and you see the black line represents only the decreases. The controls are, these results are controlled for the retest effects, test retest effects in the control group. You have to imagine the control group here at the 0 dotted line. And you see decreasing cocaine uses show improvement in all cognitive domains. Maybe the strongest improvement were found in the decorative memory and also in the attention domain. However, people who strongly increase their cocaine consumption are also getting worse. And this effect was significant specifically in the working memory domain. We split these groups into further subgroups and looked for the people who completely quit their cocaine use, where we found cocaine at the baseline assessment, but we didn't find any cocaine in the hairs at the follow-up assessment. And these subjects, here's this line, these subjects strongly improved and were not distinguishable from the levels of the control group anymore. That means people who were relatively moderate users and who were completely abstinent of cocaine for at least 6 months seem to be largely reversible in terms of cognitive function. One important thing was again age of onset, because the amount of recovery was correlated with the age of onset. That means people with an early onset didn't show so much recovery, while people with a late onset were the people who showed the most pronounced recovery after abstinence or after decreasing cocaine use. However, and this was really a surprise for us, also empathy can improve if cocaine use is stopped, but can also get worse if more cocaine is used. And I had, before we started the study, I guessed that social cognitive deficits might be more a trait in cocaine users, more a predisposition, but these data suggests that it might be also partially drug-induced. And excitingly, the same was true for the social interactive task. These are the same data. This is corrected for the tendency of the controls to get a little bit less pro-social in the second assessment. However, you see cocaine decreases are getting more pro-social. They are closer to the control group than at the baseline investigation. However, increase in cocaine use didn't result in a more opportunistic pattern here, maybe because of a ceiling effect or a floor effect. Yes, that means that maybe also social interaction deficits might be partially reversible and also drug-induced in cocaine users. To To summarize, I tried to show you that recreational and dependent cocaine users display broad cognitive impairments, and these impairments are correlated with subjective and also objective drug intake parameters. But cocaine users also display changes in emotional empathy, in mental perspective taking, in basal social interaction like joint attention or money distribution tasks, and they have a smaller social network. And maybe these functions vary with changing cocaine use. That means maybe most of these changes are induced by neuroplastic adaptations as a consequence of a frequent and repeated stimulation with a strong pharmacological compound. And I told you that age of onset is an important factor for impairment and recovery. I didn't show you, but the age of onset effect was also present in the empathy and in the mental perspective data. Yes, and this bunch of data can't be collected alone, and I'm very, very grateful to my 3 PhD students, Matthias von Moos, Lea Hulka, and Katrin Preller, and also to my former study coordinator, Daniela Jenny, who accomplished to recruit so much cocaine users and at least to get them back in our lab after 1 year. And I'm also very grateful to all my collaborators who helped us to implement the paradigms or the imaging data or to do the genetic analysis as well. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Boris. That was a very, very interesting talk. Does anyone have any questions? Matthew?
Sorry, what was that book about? The total dysfunctions.
Sorry.
What was that book about you showed in that last slide? The total dysfunctions. Go up. One more. The total dysfunctions. What did you?
The book. He's asking what the book's about.
The
book? Was that a book? No?
This is a picture of artist from the 20s of the 20th century from Berlin. He's called Konrad Felix Müller, and he painted his friend. He was a writer called Walter Reiner, and Walter Reiner was cocaine addicted, and he wrote a famous novel called Cocaine. And he painted his friend as he was injecting cocaine user with a cocaine needle or with a cocaine. Therefore, I used this picture.
Rob?
There have been other sort of face processing tasks that are more kind of implicit nature of cocaine users, just things like you expected scan patterns or anything like that amongst that data. Just interested in whether what you're seeing, we know that there's a reward that goes along with joint attention, whether there's a sort of deficit in pursuit of that reward, failure to process the reward, or whether actually it's a failure just to attend to those aspects of the face in the first place.
It's a good question. Interestingly, I have this data, I think, with me. Where are they, I think? Here. There are some performance measurements in this task. And they didn't make more errors. They didn't complete less trials, and also the reaction times were not different. And therefore we thought that it is not a problem of attention here. The task is relatively easy, it's not really demanding. We also tried to correlate the amount of this joint attention effect with cognitive parameters, and we didn't found any correlation. Therefore, I think it's a very important question, but I think in this specific case, it's not a problem of sustained attention deficit. Yeah?
It would be interesting to see. I know that some of Schulbach's works a bit more as a kind of object shared, joint attention to an object, changes in preference and things like that. It'd be interesting, obviously, then you have that other aspect of reward going alongside the aspect of just sharing attention, but the actual transference of that reward onto an object. It's quite interesting to see whether that's warranted.
That would be very interesting. We did also another task. We haven't published this task yet, but we are currently writing a paper, and we used a paradigm in which we measure a source of social reward, specifically social feedback. And in this task you can manipulate two specific sources. We have an object condition, we have an object reward, and we have a social reward, a social feedback for their music taste in this case. And we saw that our cocaine users display less reward in both features. They have less object reward and they have less social reward, and this converges in the medial prefrontal cortex, at least in the medial orbitofrontal cortex. Both conditions show less activation in the same area. And therefore we now think that there is a generalized problem with mainly value processing, because this area is mainly interpreted as an area involved in value evaluation of stimulus reward contingencies. Therefore we think it's either source of reward will cause a smaller signal in the reward system of cocaine users.
And just to legal one last question, I just wondered whether you've done anything with drug cues. So whether, for example, in your MRI study, one way to make your cocaine users more like your controls, you replace the objects of attention with something that they would be motivated, so you have a motivational aspect.
Unfortunately, we didn't use any drug cue reactivity paradigm in this study. This study was so overloaded with tasks that we have to decide what we measure and what we leave out. And we now doing a task. We are very interested in the role of glutamate in craving for cocaine, and there we implemented several drug cues in order to show if the striatal glutamate signal changes, and also try to
so is that long-term change, or is this a trial MRS change?
We use a pharmacological challenge,
right, okay.
a glutamatergic compound, to manipulate this, and we have two measurement points, placebo and the glutamate challenge, and we have two conditions with and without cue presentation. And we are very we haven't analyzed data yet, but this is a study that we are doing now. It's very interesting, but in this study we didn't have any cue reactivity task, unfortunately.
Any other questions? I was just wondering so when you looked at your follow-up study, you had the hair samples as quantifying your increases and decreases. Were they corroborating the self-report measures that you took at that time as well?
But we have seen a very interesting effect. currently we write a paper about this question. We saw that at the baseline measurement, there was a good correlation between self-report and HARES. As a follow-up, this correlation disappeared. It was completely, it was not visible anymore. Interestingly, it can't be explained only by the increasing users. We thought, okay, the increasing users are a little bit ashamed and they don't like to say us that they use so much more. This is not true. Interestingly, also, decreasing users made sometimes false statements about their recent consumptions. And we are now making a paper about the reliability of self-reports, and especially if we can try to avoid people that will likely inform us or misreport their consumption. Yeah? And it's interesting, it's a little bit trivial. They are younger, they are poorer, and they are less well educated. These people tend to make more false reports. Yeah.
Okay, yes, Harry, sorry.
I just have a couple of general questions, and apologies, these aren't cognitive psychology questions, because I'm not a cognitive psychologist. I was just wondering where you think the interaction lies between some of your findings around emotional empathy and emotional support in the social cultural response to cocaine use and cocaine dependence. I'm not sure what the situation is like in Zurich, but here in the UK, individuals who are labelled as being dependent are socially isolated and excluded. High level of inequalities, for example, which will impact upon their social and cultural capital, etc. So that's my first question. My second question is that it's often quite clear to understand the impact of functional deficits on day-to-day life. So working memory deficits, psychopathology, etc. have a real impact on people's day-to-day life. In your view, what is the significance of these changes in altruistic behaviour or emotional behaviour? Should we be concerned about this? The big question is, so what?
Okay, the first question. I think the social role of drugs is strongly depending on the culture of a nation. And I was really surprised and also impressed as I came to Switzerland. I'm a German and I did my PhD in Germany and I did a drug study with cocaine, with ecstasy users, and I tried to do a study in cocaine users as well. The problem was that I didn't find participants for my cocaine study. Nobody wants to be tested. There were users, but they say, no, I don't like. They were much more paranoid to go to a university and say, yeah, I'm a cocaine user, and it was not such a big problem in MDMA users, and also not such a big problem in cannabis users, but also the overall availability of drug users was moderate. In Switzerland, we've got so much requests, and the threshold to go to the university and say, okay, I'm a cocaine user, was, from my perception, much, much lower. Because Switzerland is a more liberal society, and drug use is much less stigmatized than in Germany. And I was really surprised. Yeah? But that means I think that our cocaine users don't have much problems to come to the university. but this might be different in other countries. First question. Second question. You know, at least in cocaine addiction, the relapse rates, as in any kind of drug addiction, are relatively high. And we speculate that maybe one reason for the high relapse rate might be that they are less accessible in therapeutic relationships. Yeah, that therapeutic relationships are of lower quality because these people are a little bit less interested in social contacts, a little bit less interested in building new social relationships or maintain social relationships, that this will likely have an effect on treatment success. And we now propose, unfortunately I'm not the person to develop new treatment manuals, but we propose that a specific stimulant treatment program should be developed addressing these results and try to train empathy, social competence. We all know social competence is still done, but in a more focused way maybe. Also to train a certain kind of social reward. I don't know how to train this, but if we accomplish to train this, I'm convinced that this might be able to improve treatment of stimulant users. And therefore, with the social network size, I think we could demonstrate that there is a consequence for their daily lives. Although it's clear, I don't have seen the longitudinal social network data yet. We are still analyzing these data. But I'm convinced that this will also be improved in people who decrease their consumption. And this nicely illustrates the significance for the daily lives of these users. But one specific, important annotation here. These are very severe recreational users. Many of them maybe are close to addiction or dependence. If someone uses cocaine once a month, half a gram for some years, this will doesn't make a lot to their social lives. However, if they escalate their use, then they are at risk that their social lives are more and more destroyed.
Thank you. I think that's all the time we've got for questions, but we're going over to the ship and mitre for a drink if anyone would like to join us. So thank you again, Boris, for an interesting talk.